Okay, great. Well, thanks a lot, Nathan. It's a great attempt to say my name. Anyway, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. Today, I will provide some of the DTS working group updates, what we have been up to, and what we want to do going forward. Okay, good. So the agenda for today, I'll give a brief introduction about the DTS working group, how it came to existence, for those who are new to the community and who have not followed about what this working group does. I'll talk about the progress that we have achieved so far. Then, some of the procedural changes that we have talked to the tech board and agreed upon. I'll talk about the work we are doing towards 22.11 release, the future roadmap, and call for action, the very important call for action. Okay, so I'll go through these slides, and then we can do a Q&A session at the end. Okay, so introduction to the working group. So today, there are two testing frameworks in DPDK. The first one is the DPDK apps, which is in the app directory. There are multiple applications over there to test DPDK device abstractions like test PMD, test event dev, and so on. We also have the unit test application, which does the testing for various software libraries. So we see that these applications, they get updated, as and when new features are added, and the community makes sure that there is enough testing coverage there through these applications. And the unit test cases, we can run them automatically as well. So there is enough coverage for the unit test cases. We also have another testing framework. We call it as the DPDK test suite. This is the framework to automate integration testing. It makes use of the applications in the app directory. It contains test cases that make sure that all the devices that are supported in DPDK behave the same way. So essentially, it's a framework to come up with a topology with server platforms or SoC platforms with various devices attached to those platforms. And then you can also write test cases. For example, you could write a test case to do end-to-end IPsec testing, for example. Okay. So why are we focusing on the DTS? I was not part of very initial discussions, and I forget some of the discussions we have had. But essentially, what it comes down to the test cases and the features not moving at the same pace. We were adding features in DPDK for various devices, but the test cases were not moving at the same pace. So the tech board debated about using various test frameworks, but ultimately we chose DTS because it was already in a good shape, and we didn't see that other alternatives were on par with DTS. But having chosen DTS, there were a lot of input from various leads in the tech board that DTS needs several improvements and so on. So the tech board decided that we could create a work group which goes ahead and collects all this feedback and then looks at, hey, what can we do with that feedback and how can we improve DTS such that anybody can go ahead and add a test case. So I took up the responsibility to lead this working group, and we had a very first meeting in April 2021. To discuss what we want to do in this working group. So there were various leads from different companies who joined that meeting. And we discussed about making DTS mandatory. So by that, what I mean is whenever DPDK patch is submitted to implement a new API for device abstraction, or we are implementing some new features in the existing APIs, there needs to be a corresponding test case submitted along with that patch. So, that would ensure that the test cases and the features are moving along at the same pace. So during that meeting, we also agreed to collect feedback from the community as well. Okay, so this is how the DTS working group came into existence. So what we have done, from that meeting. So we went ahead and collected feedback from the community. There was very good feedback from the community, and there was a lot of feedback from the UNH lab through their experience of bringing up DTS in their lab, what all issues they faced and what can be improved and so on. So this feedback was collected in a document, and at the end of these slides, I have got links to all of these documents and Excel sheets that we have created in this working group. So we took this feedback and then we debated around this feedback, and we triaged that feedback, and we just divided that into two categories. A must-have category and a good-to-have category. So the must-have items are the ones which we wanted to fix, before making DTS mandatory. These were, yes, we need to fix them. Without fixing these, we can't make DTS mandatory. And then good-to-have were some things, which could be fixed later. For example, hey, we need more debugging capabilities in DTS. That's something that's good to have. Must have is something like, what can be a good example here for must have? DTS test cases cannot make changes to the DPDK code. That's a must-have for us. We want to make sure that test cases don't touch DPDK code. They use existing DPDK APIs to do whatever they want to do. So those are certain examples of must-haves and good-to-have. Again, the documents that we have, clearly mark that feedback into these two categories. And then we went ahead and identified all the test cases in the existing DTS that were modifying DPDK code. Some of those test cases, when we analyzed, they needed changes in DPDK. For example, we made certain changes to L3 forward, example application, which would expose certain parameters that the DTS test cases can make use of. We made certain changes on the DPDK side, and then we also removed some test cases in DTS side. We thought that we don't need them anymore, and we changed certain test cases on DTS side as well. But there is more work to be done. I think there's at least another 30% of the work that's left to be done there. And then along with the changes, we needed several procedural changes. How does some of the procedures that we follow in the DPDK community, how do they need to change in order to make DTS mandatory? We talked about these changes in the DPDK tech board, and we agreed upon some of the changes. So I'll talk about these changes in the later slide. We provided an update to the community in October of 2021 to go over where we are. And we have been providing regular updates to tech board as well, especially when we needed to make certain decisions that needed tech board's input. Okay, so now going into the procedural changes, right? So we wanted to make sure that submitting DTS and DPDK patches together is a possibility. That becomes a reality. The reason being, the DTS patches will have dependencies on the DPDK patches. So we wanted to make sure that a single patch series can contain patches for both DPDK as well as DTS. Okay, so this means that the DTS has to be part of DPDK repo, and we have decided that DTS would be another directory under the existing DPDK repo. And all these DTS changes that would be submitted in the patch series would be discussed in the DPDK mailing list. Okay, this also would require some CI infrastructure changes. So for example, today, when DPDK patch series is submitted, it goes through some check patch, validation. It undergoes some testing in the EVNH lab, and so on. There are some changes required over there, and we really have not discussed what those changes are, but we think that we can discuss those, going forward. So for example, things like the DTS patch, it will have its own check patch kind of a script that needs to run only on those DTS patches. Those changes need to happen in the CI infrastructure. So we are yet to identify those changes. Okay. Then the DTS releases would be synced with DPDK releases, including the LTS releases. This is pretty natural because DTS would be another directory within DPDK. So all the tagging, branching, bug fixing, would follow the same DPDK policies. I don't think we need to invent something new over there. And then, backporting of DPDK patches. So if there are any DTS changes that were associated with those DPDK patches, those also would be backported along with the DPDK patches. And then the DTS will be experimental for some time. This will give us some freedom in terms of making breaking changes in the DTS. So it is going to be experimental for some time, and I'm not really sure how long that time frame is, but that's something that we need to look for in the future, depending on how DTS matures in the community. Okay. So we will have maintainers for this DTS directory within DPDK. Lijuan, who has been who is the current DTS maintainer from Intel, she would be the main maintainer. And then Owen, who works with the UNH lab, he would be the co-maintainer for the DTS. And then I expect that there would be module-specific maintainers for the DTS framework itself. This would be based on contributions. I see that Uri has been contributing a lot for this work. So similarly, if we have more contributors in the future, we would like to have module-specific maintainers, just like what we do today in DPDK. We also expect that DPDK module maintainers will maintain respective test cases. By this, what I mean is, for example, ETH dev maintainers will maintain the respective test cases in the DTS, in that DTS directory. So that should ensure that, again, the features that are being added have got test cases, respective test cases available within DTS. So, this module maintainer would become the person responsible for ensuring that. Okay. So now moving on to the work that we have been doing towards 22.11. We did some cleanup on the DTS mainline itself. We used Black and iSort. So these are some of the tools that are used to automatically format the code. They have got certain configurations to choose what kind of formatting you want for the code. So we went ahead and ran these tools on the DTS mainline to make sure that the code looks and feels the same throughout the repo. We also used the Pylama tool, which it's kind of a check patch kind of a tool, which makes sure that the patches that are being submitted are following certain criteria. So we came up with certain criteria using Pylama tools, and we used those and ran that against the DTS mainline, and there were some warnings and errors. We fixed those issues. We have removed support for compiling DPDK with Makefile. DPDK itself has moved on to using Mason alone. So the DTS mainline supports Mason alone now. And I also talked about removing several test cases. We went ahead and removed several test cases. Like, for example, there was a test case for checking ABI. This is already being run external to DTS, so we removed that. There were some test cases which were running unit test cases. Again, this is being done outside already using Mason. So we removed several test cases which we felt are redundant. We also ended up removing some of the files that had the GPL license. But we are not able to remove all of them. But what we have made sure is GPL files that were there in the framework that are removed, but the GPL files that were there for the test cases, they are still there. But I think we have got a strategy to address that. We will put them in a separate repo and pull them as and when we are running the test cases. But again, those are test case specific, and we will talk about them more when we start integrating the test cases. And not all test cases require these GPL files. Okay, so that's the cleanup work that we did on the DTS mainline, and that cleanup would apply to the DTS that would come into the DPDK repo. So there were some changes that we didn't want to make in the DTS mainline. We wanted them to apply only for the DTS that we are bringing in, because we thought they are kind of they might break changes in DTS, for example. So some of the changes we did was the copyright header changes. The copyright header, there was a long format. We changed all of that to follow the SPDX format with BSD3. Actually, these copyright header changes went into the DTS mainline as well. So all the files conform to that, conform to the format that we are using in DPDK currently. And then we went ahead and renamed a lot of base classes to make sure that we have these new definitions that we came up with, and we went ahead and made those changes. But this change is only available in the future DTS branch. So the future DTS branch is the one that we are going to use to create patches out of. By that, what I mean is the patches that we are submitting to DTS, the DPDK community, they would come out of the future DTS branch. They will not come out of the DTS mainline branch. So this means that the future DTS branch needs to be synced with DTS mainline. So what we are thinking is every time the DTS mainline makes a release, we would cherry pick the patches from DTS mainline into future DTS branch. So that way the future DTS is aligned with DTS mainline, as well as it is aligned with the patches that we are sending into the DPDK community. Okay. Sorry, just give me one moment. Okay, good. So now, so that's the work that we did in the DTS mainline and the future DTS branch. Now, we were looking at how do we start creating patches that we can send to the DPDK community. We kind of, needed some direction and feedback from the DPDK community on that front. So in our first attempt, we just took the DTS framework and we kind of sliced and diced it around certain boundaries. The sole goal we had over there was how can we make it easy for the DPDK community to kind of review this DTS framework, right? And it was very important for us to ensure that the work that we are doing, that the work that we are bringing into DPDK community is reviewed and agreed upon in the community. So we just had the sole goal that, hey, let's just take this framework and try and see how we can make it easy. So we just went ahead and broke it around certain boundaries. And it was not a clean separation just because, now we are taking this code that has been developed for a long time and we are trying to slice it. So that was a very, what to say, kind of a brute force attempt to send those patches. But we received a lot of good feedback and that made us think through as to how we want to achieve this. So we received feedback from Samar, David, and others in terms of what they would like to see. They wanted to see patches in small quantities. They don't wanted to take this entire framework in one shot. They wanted smaller group of patches, and the patches need to be around functional boundaries. For example, the example that was mentioned was, hey, can I have a patch series that just looks at how can I connect to a DUT, for example, or a SUT, right? So this required us to think through a little bit, and it requires us to make more changes than we anticipated to provide that, cleaner boundaries, which is okay. We think that that's okay. So I think, we think we have a process, we have a way to do this. We think we are very confident on that. So in our second attempt, we have sent 2 patch series. The first one is SSH connection to SUT? How do we establish a connection to a SUT and run some commands, execute some commands on that SUT? So the first series just is about the basic functionality that we want to achieve. And we are fairly confident here that we have considered the feedback from the community, and we think we are headed in the right direction. But again, we need that feedback. We need the community to look at this, at these two patch series, and ensure that yes, we are in fact on the right path here. Okay, so we have established a goal for ourselves that in 22.11 we want to merge these two patch series. These two patch series would ensure that we have a controller node on which the DTS test cases are running, and then we have a SUT which can connect to this controller node, and we can run the hello world application that DPDK has, and then collect the results back and validate that yes, in fact, the hello world test case ran on the SUT and the results are good. So we think this is a very simple test case, and it should give us like basic framework that we can build upon in the future. Okay, so currently in the community, there are two patch series. One is the SSH connection series. This has the least amount of code to connect to the SUT. I'm just talking about the highlights of these patches, but you can always go to the patchwork and look at these two patch series. So as part of the SSH connection patch series, we are adding some developer tools and project tools. Developer tools are like I talked about Pylama, which is like a check patch tool, and then we have got things like Black and ISOT, which developers can make use of as well. We also have got some project tools and various configurations that these tools need. We are managing the dependency using Poetry, so there are some configurations related to Poetry available there. One of the big changes that we are introducing, again, it came from the feedback that we received, is the config parser. We see that in the DTS mainline, the configuration parsing is not very ideal. So we are kind of streamlining that parsing, the config files. And then, once you parse, how that parsed data is distributed within the framework, as well as to the test cases that are that will get added. And then, there's a way to validate that configuration as well. This validation is going to be done upfront. You don't need to run test cases to realize that, hey, there's something wrong with the configuration. And the configuration files will follow the YAML format. So this is one of the big changes that's coming in, and I think this is one of the good changes that we will bring in. This also has got the base node class with just connect and execute methods. But we think that this will, there will be more methods added in the subsequent patches. So that's one of the themes that we are adopting, that not everything would be available upfront. Things will be added in an incremental fashion. For example, the config parser, it would be added in an incremental fashion. And again, the best example I can give you is this node class. It has got bare minimum methods right now. And as we move along, there would be more methods added as and when required. So, we have kind of adopted that approach because it makes it easier on our part. We don't need to write up everything upfront. And then it also makes it easy for the community to review. They know that, hey, there are these two methods, and they can really see that these two methods are being used in that patch series. So there's nothing, additional. Hey, there's this additional method, but we don't see the usage of that method. That should not happen. Okay. And then the second series, it's still in the RFC stage. This would be about running that Hello World example application on the SUT. This needs some additional work. It needs to be, there needs to be a cleaner separation in the various commits that are there in the series. But we are working on that, and that would come in. So, like I said, this would run the Hello World application and validate the results to ensure that, yes, it ran correctly on the SUT. It also has capabilities to build DPDK on the SUT. It can configure the SUT for running DPDK applications, and it has also got things to run a test and collect back the results. Yeah, so there are more smaller things that are available in these two patch series. Please look at patchwork and review. I'm really happy with how long the results that we have achieved through these two patches. But again, yeah, we need to be aligned. We need to be aligned with what the community is expecting. So it's good to, I would encourage everyone to go ahead, review these patches, and give us feedback. Okay, future roadmap. Here, this is not the entire thing. This is about how far we are looking into the future. So right now, what we are looking at is once the Hello World patch is merged, we would like to add some smoke tests. So these smoke tests would ensure that the topology of the controller, node, SUT, and a traffic generator is in fact set up well. So if you run this smoke test, it will say, yes, your test setup is working well, they are connected the way they are supposed to be connected, and so on, right? So this would require us to run some traffic, between the traffic generator and the SUT. So we are thinking that we will have this traffic generator abstract class with SCAPI backend implemented. And this traffic generator abstract class would allow us to plug in any other traffic generator. So we are thinking that adding this smoke test would be a good first step to introduce some basic performance test. So with this, we think we should be able to have like a T-Rex backend or any other traffic generator backend for that traffic generator abstract class. So once we add a basic performance test, we feel that it should bring in enough maturity in the framework, and that should allow us to bring additional test cases. So we don't know what those additional test cases are that we bring in, but I would think test cases involving ETH dev with the NIC cards would be something that we would target as the first set of test cases to bring in. So those test cases themselves would require changes because we have introduced things like traffic generator abstract class. We also think we would want to improve the logger. Today it is very basic, but we want to have some improvements in terms of how much data that we log from a developer perspective that they see on the screen versus how much we can log in files, which automated script in UNH lab can go ahead and do a lot more things. So we have got some ideas there on the logger. So those things will change, and because of those changes, the test cases themselves would need to undergo changes. So yeah, so this is all about how far we are looking ahead at this point. Obviously, there are a lot more test cases that we need to bring in, and those test cases might require changes, additional changes in framework. So we have not thought through all of that, and as we make progress, I think we will have a better idea, and we will see what can be done, and we will publish that additional roadmap going forward. Okay. So one announcement that we would like to make is we would like to merge the DTS working group meeting with the DPDK CI meeting. The reason being, we have gone through the feedback that we got. We have debated that, and we think we have identified a path forward. So if I have to say in other words, we have done that heavy lifting part, and now we are creating these patches, and I feel it is better to have, discussions around those patches in the community, in the DPDK mailing list. So instead of discussing them in the DTS working group. This is going to provide a lot more visibility with the work that we have been doing, because there are additional stakeholders who are present in the DPDK CI meeting, and we think that it should attract more people to look at these patches that we are creating in the DPDK community. But having said that, it also means that the DPDK working group meeting was every week, but the DPDK CI meeting is every other week. So there will be less number of touch points for the working group as well, but we'll see how that goes. But as of now, the tech board, the DTS working group, and the DPDK CI meeting stakeholders have agreed to do this merge. So going forward, I'll set a date, maybe September 15th, or I'll identify a date soon enough to do this merge. Okay. Throughout this process, over the period of last one and a half years, I have been working with Uri, Lijuan, Lincoln, and Owen very closely, and it has been really a pleasure to work with them, and they have made tremendous contributions to this working group. I look forward to working with them, and I look forward for the community to see their work through the patches that we are going to submit. And there have been other people who have dropped into the DPDK working group meetings now and then to check where we are. They have provided feedback and so on. So thanks to everyone who have provided feedback for the work that we have been doing. Okay. So now the important part, the call for action. Reviews. We have hit that stage where we are sending in patches, and this is the crucial phase where we need to make sure that we are running and we are not getting blocked. All right. So there are patches in the community today. Take a look, give them a run. I see that they're very simple to run. So please run them, get familiarized with the code. See if you have got any usability feedback when you run these patches, and provide that feedback. Grow your knowledge as well by following along the patches. Ultimately, all the developers have to develop the test cases. So it's good to make sure that you are following along with these patches. If there are any Python experts, I know everybody have a lot of opinion on how Python code should be written. So please, if you know the best practices, provide that feedback. We would like to make sure we are following those best practices for Python. Then we have the DTS community. Please look at these patches and help us avoid any pitfalls that we have seen, that you have seen in the DTS community. We would like to avoid any past mistakes that have happened. And lastly, attend the DPDK CI meetings, and there are a lot of opportunities to contribute to creating these patches. So please, the DTS working group can help out in terms of identifying those areas where you can go off, create some patches. We are very open with that. So please get involved and see what you can do. Okay, that's all from my side. I'm open for any questions.
Thanks, Honnappa. Do we have any questions from in-person attendees about the DTS working group? Lincoln.
Hey, Honnappa, this is Lincoln here. I don't think you hit on it, or maybe I just missed it, and I apologize, but where did we tentatively plan to document or provide the documentation for all of the test cases too, right? So like the steps that are being taken in like the hello world test or whatnot. Because I think that's an important part of this too, that the testing gets described in terms of like what steps are being taken on the platform.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Lincoln, for that question. The documentation, there is some documentation today in the 2 patches that we have submitted. At this stage, it is pretty simple just because the patches themselves are simple. But the documentation, again, would be added incrementally depending on the patches that we are submitting. So just like what we do in DPDK today, right? Any patch submitted in DPDK, there are test cases, there are documentation related changes, and so on as part of the same series. So we are following the same approach. The documentation is going to be part of the patches that we are submitting. And we are looking at generating this documentation in an automated fashion. Does that answer the question, Lincoln?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, so we are also coming up with a standard documentation format for the test cases. So each test case would follow that format, and that way it would ensure that we have a consistent documentation for every test case. And we are also talking about adding user guides and like 2 set of guides. One guide is for the developers, which will help them to make sure that they understand how to set up a DTS environment. And then another set of document which will address like the testing community. It will talk about how to run test cases and so on. So these are the 2 documents that we are talking about on top of the documents that we are submitting through the patches. Yeah.
Okay, so another question, Stan Kardak here. From my experience, we've had a bit of issues with the DTS, or actually DTS is very particular about system setup it is running on or testing against, and it goes to either the NICs that are going to be used. For example, there are X520 NICs which have a little bit different device IDs, but they're essentially the same device. And let's say DTS only has a single device ID that it tests against. Other type of particularity is that it assumes that there are, for example, at least 8 cores available on each system. There is no such kind of detection of validation. Is that the case? Or the third thing, being that it assumes that there is a NUMA setup, for example, even with a single node, but there is a NUMA running on. And all that was in the, let's say, the Python side of the DTS test cases. Is that something that you're also trying to tackle in and kind of rework? How, did you think about how to tackle the testing matrix, system versus NIC versus feature?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, right? So I'm not exactly sure about these particular things that you talked about, but we are aware of the problems that DTS had. So for example, we have been talking about DTS using only DPDK APIs. So by that, what I mean is DTS is not going to be aware of any peculiar things about a particular hardware. It is if I have to give an example, if we consider a NIC card, the DTS is going to treat it as a NIC card. It's not going to be Intel NIC card or a Melnot NIC card and so on. So everything would be done through DPDK APIs. So that's something that we have talked about. And then we have also talked about doing things through capability APIs. So we don't want to have things like, hey, can I make a list of test cases that I don't want to run because my hardware does not support certain features. Instead, what we want to do is we want to query the hardware, understand what features it's supporting, and then go ahead and run the test cases that are for those features. So those are some of the things that we have discussed. But yeah, I will take these particular things that you mentioned, like, how many cores are there in the system? Can we just work with 1 core or 2 cores versus mandating that, hey, there has to be a NUMA node or 8 cores and so on. We will take that feedback and see, keep that in mind and see, what can be done there.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah.
Any other questions, thoughts for Honnappa about the DTS working group? Anyone in the chat or anyone in person? Okay, if not, thank you, Honnappa, for taking that time to go through DTS in such detail. I know not everyone is familiar with the work that the group does, and it's helpful. I appreciate you taking the time out to contribute.
Yep.
So
thank you so much.
You. A pleasure.